Oh, hello, everyone. We are giving some time as people are logging in. Good to see everyone joining. Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is great to see so many people joining us, and I know more people are going to continue to come in. There they go. It's always fun doing this online. You can just see numbers increasing and increasing. Seeing who's getting their audio set. There we go. So thank you everyone for joining us. I am still Claudia. Great to see everyone. It is noon here in Chicago in the Midwest, and today we are super fortunate to be able to spend some time talking with Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab. If you're not familiar, although I'm pretty sure most of you are, Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab is a scientist, a writer, advocate focused on reducing inequality, specifically in higher education. She's used her doctorate in sociology in countless ways, including by working as a professor at 3 different institutions, leading major studies, writing books, which was actually one of the ways I first became introduced to your work, Sara, and also founding not 1, not 2, 3 organizations. Today, Sara is living in Philadelphia, for all those who don't know what Philly is, and actually is consulting full time. So thank you so much, Sara, for joining us. It's great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, or we were just doing that for the beginning while everybody was coming in. Let me, oh, sorry, it's right over here. Stop doing that real quick. Am I still sharing or did I exit it? We're good? All right.
I don't see a sharing screen. I see everybody's face,
Perfect.
including yours.
Perfect. So Sara, it's so good to see you. It's so good to catch up with you and all the wonderful work that you've been doing. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, you know, there's always an origin story. You've been such a passionate advocate in the field of basic needs. I'm just super curious, like, how did you get to this point of really being able to focus in your career on this specific topic?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. If I was my 96-year-old grandfather, he would say she was born this way. She came out fighting. I've always been really, I've always seen injustice. I've always been pissed by it. I've always been concerned that the things that, that my family had or my friends, had, other people didn't have. I grew up in a county in part of the United States in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County. It's one of the wealthiest counties in the whole country.
Yeah.
The wealth inequality was incredibly clear to me. My best friends were Vietnamese, and their neighborhoods didn't have the things that other neighborhoods had, and so on. If you fast forward and I go through my educational, institutions and all of that, I saw these things happening. I studied sociology and I got a bigger framework for it. And then I started studying, financial aid. Right. And what a time to talk about financial aid, if there was ever a time. My lens on financial aid was always a little different. I always read the literature and I always felt like you weren't seeing the humans in it. I always felt like we were talking about numbers and funding and designs, but we weren't talking about like the student experience of financial aid, and particularly whether it was actually achieving its intention, which is
Right.
to remove the financial constraints from your life while you're in college. So when I had my first big opportunity to look at financial aid as a practice, I was studying a private program. If you've read my book, Paying the Price, this is the program I write about. And I thought, it's great, like we're doing quantitative research, we're looking at the usual things, but we also need to talk to people. And I was fortunate that I was able to secure some philanthropic support so that we could actually afford to talk to people. Talking to people in studies is not cheap. It actually requires, more money in some cases.
Right.
And I'm glad that I made a decision that we would talk to people in a very kind of open way. We wouldn't act like we were the experts and we knew the best questions. So what my team did was we went and we talked to people, and we literally started with, how are you? How's college? And the world really shifted for me the day that one of those people, it was an 18-year-old university student in Milwaukee, responded that she wasn't okay. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. And I think my whole story has been written since that moment. She changed everything, because that wasn't an answer that I'd heard before. It wasn't like I didn't know about poverty. I just want to be clear. Like, I spent years living in West Philadelphia before Penn made it gentrified and everything. There was plenty of poverty. It's just that higher ed wasn't talking about this kind of thing, right? And so here we are, and it's been like, I'm just doing fast math. It's been more than 15 years since that moment.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and I think many of us have had some of those pivotal moments where it's just like, we don't often think that our students in higher education, that they can be in higher ed, but also be poor, hungry, homeless. Like, we think even though education has come a long way and who has access, there's still so much further that we can get to. And even those that have gotten access, that there's still challenges that they're encountering many times every single day. And I wanted to point out to everybody too, in case they haven't seen your book. It is Paying the Price, College Students, Financial Aid, and the Betrayal of the American Dream. And that's some pretty big stuff in there, right? Because I think a lot of in your book, and as you were talking about the FAFSA and where it is now, there's some really scary stuff that we're really concerned about of what's going to happen for our students in this coming year, especially seeing the numbers are not where they typically are in terms of students applying for aid.
True. It was also predictable. I have a little bit of a different take on this whole mess, because I spent all these years really showing what I didn't understand before I did the study, but I came to understand by the time I was done, which is that the financial aid system is a miserable way to actually deliver real money to people. And I actually don't think its purpose is to deliver money to people. I think that's a story that we tell ourselves. I think that, if you go back and in my second book, which is an edited volume, and I do this thing in one of the chapters where I go back in the history of this policy. It came from a time when Congress wanted, under pressure, frankly, from the civil rights movement, to be able to say, yes, we care about these values. And what we're going to do to solve money is we're going to give people money in this bureaucratic way, and it's going to solve the problem. It's going to take this issue off the table. And that's a fallacy. I mean, bureaucracies are not good at delivering money. Also, they only deliver money to people they deem deserving.
Right.
And, I cut my teeth studying a program that used to be called Aid to Families for Dependent Children. Some people called it welfare, which became temporary aid to needy families. Think about that shift, by the way. Aid to families with dependent children, basically no value statement in there, to temporary aid to needy families, right? Same nonsense plays out here. The FAFSA defines who deserves it and who doesn't. You don't deserve it if you can't do the form. Right. And then it puts you through so much in terms of waiting. Even after the FAFSA, everybody in my book, Paying the Price, did the FAFSA. And they were still in pain. because it doesn't deliver enough money. It doesn't deliver it on the right time. It questions you at every turn. It gaslights you by giving you numbers that are totally fake. I've debunked the numbers used in EFC, in COA, all of it. And it sets up practitioners like financial aid officers to be the bad guys,
Right.
even though they're just the front line. And that's a big contributor to basic needs insecurity. And then we get ourselves in a situation where we start arguing over the length of a form instead of arguing over whether the form should exist and whether the form is actually the best way to do this. And then we get ourselves in this current moment where, big surprise, we overhauled a really complicated bureaucratic system and it didn't go as expected. This should remind you all of healthcare, by the way. I wish that instead we had talked about whether in the modern day, when most people need help paying for college, there might have been an alternative way to do this. And I wish that if we were going to keep doing it the same way, that we put real resources into it. And finally, in this current moment, this moment where we're saying things like there could be catastrophic declines in college enrollment, that we would admit that there are thousands of colleges, thousands, that don't ask students to decide in the spring where they're going, and don't even expect students to do their FAFSAs till the fall. They start with the nation's community colleges and their public regionals and many others that have flexible enrollment. We could be helping students pivot in their plans, getting them enrolled, and setting up transfer pathways. And I don't hear anybody talking about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a really scary year for so many. And certainly I know you also teach at a community college, and a lot of my background is also in community college, and we already had challenges with students coming in later, right, in the summer, like right before, and how much that's going to get exasperated even more with the challenges that are happening right now. But Sarah, a lot of this topic, you're saying it's been 15 years. It's been 15 years for you, at least, right? And for everybody, our timing on how much we've been focused on this is really, there's a variance there. But the interesting part that I've seen is that a lot of people have really started to pay a lot more attention since the pandemic. But this stuff was happening way beforehand, right? So it's like, all of a sudden we started taking care of technology and all those other things. But the issue has been prevalent way before the pandemic. Certainly there's been an impact since the pandemic. But could you talk a little bit about at least what we've, and I don't even know where we are in this stage. Are we post-pandemic? Are we not? I mean, geez, like who knows? We don't talk about it as much. We're not as protective as much, but we still have a lot of literature out there that's really talking about the students and their impact going through the pandemic. But in your 15 years of researching this, and especially since the pandemic is kind of closing out somewhat, but not really, have you noticed any changes, at least in terms of what student needs have been since COVID? Has there been any shifts like since the pandemic, or especially like after it, that we didn't know beforehand, or is it the same stuff and we're just more enlightened?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And it's a really hard question to answer. And the main reason is because we didn't used to bother to actually collect data on this, right? So, I've been collecting data on it since 2008, but that was mostly Wisconsin data for the first 5 years. We've only been collecting data in multiple states since 2015. The federal government just collected data for the first time ever in 2020 and released it in 2023. So, but that said, if I had to, put my money where my mouth is, whatever the expression is, I am positive that this has been a problem as long as higher ed's been around. But I'm also positive that the problem is greater now because we did do work to increase access. And if you let more people in who don't come from incredible advantages, by definition, they're going to bring both more assets and more needs, right? I think that higher ed's a better place today for folks being there, whether or not they come from privilege. But what the pandemic, the first thing the pandemic did that we have to remember is it drove people out of college and away from college. So the measurements of how many students in college who were basic needs insecure did not go up because people were gone. What we're dealing with now is people are trying to find their way back.
Right.
And some of them experienced significant health challenges and significant financial and economic impacts due to the pandemic that destabilized them. And now they're coming to college with that. And when I say health, by the way, I really want to underline, I have a paper, my first paper published in like a serious scientific journal, like not social science, was actually about the effect of the virus, the COVID virus, like literally the virus. The virus is having effects on people that are lasting and that are associated with increased food insecurity. Okay, so it isn't just the isolation, it isn't just the economic impact, which is also important. And of course, the mental health impact. And I don't think that we can, miss that. I think there's a lot of talk about it. I'm glad. Now, the one other thing around this, though, is that I do think that the affordable housing crisis that has been continuing to grow around this country, that people got a little relief from during the pandemic, thanks to things like eviction moratoriums. That is at an all-time, it's awful. It's awful in most places. And so we are seeing a lot of housing insecurity. And maybe that's at an all-time high. It's totally possible that it really is. And it would be because of things that are happening in the broader context, as well as specifically to students. So same thing. I mean, I'll give you one other example. The other big ticket item that students struggle with is childcare. Well, of course, that's a bigger issue now because we have more people in college who have kids. That's the reason it's a big issue. It's not that childcare wasn't a big deal for people 30 years ago, although the cost of childcare certainly wasn't as high and there were more programs available to help. But the big win is that it's no longer the case that, for example, having a child as a teenager means you will not go to college. That's not true anymore. We should be proud of that. We've created pathways. Now we have to create support for the people who followed those pathways to come in.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many deeper challenges, but I think you're right. It's just a lot of the awareness, the impact of COVID, and some of the stuff that we don't even quite know what the impact will be, right? I mean, some of us have gotten it multiple times, but also I had insurance and I had access to being able to work remotely and I had access to these other things. So my impact certainly is nowhere along the levels of the students that I saw in their families is depleting their savings accounts and having to make up for these other parts of the family that they still haven't been able to recover from. So those stressors and all the different things, I think it'll be quite some time before we're able to fully understand the impact of COVID times, but certainly there is a little bit of the silver lining, at least that we're doing better. Like you're saying, like we have to, right? I mean, this has been a prevalent problem, as you're saying, since the inception of higher education. We know who it was accessed for. We know who was being brought in. We had the Truman Commission. We started making more access, making things more equitable, or trying to, right? I'll use your air quotes there, because certainly that's a practice that we're all still doing right now. But there's been so many things that have been brought to light, and certainly what we try to do today is to bring to light the good things that institutions are doing, right? So a lot of the things that have been brought up today, sorry, I wrote these down in the notes someplace and now I can't even find it. Of course, that's how it works. Oh, it's right here in front of me, of course. So non-tuition assistance programs, right? So trying to support students in childcare, open educational resources. These are some of the things that we've heard, at least earlier this morning. Housing scholarships, really making sure we're getting into data, food banks, technology, stipends for tuition, other programs that are focusing on low-income students. So we got a lot of stuff. We're having momentum, right? We have people who are interested, and that's why they're here today. So you've been researching this for some time. You're speaking and you're continuing to do the research in so many different ways. What are you seeing are some good things that are starting to happen, whether those are institutional based or whether those are region based, because there's also a lot of, I think, coalition building and some bigger momentum that's happening within areas of communities or even within states. So what are some of those things that you would share with the group?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you said is exactly right. There's momentum. What I think is important, especially for folks who are newer to the work to know, is that that momentum is the result of a campaign that many of us together waged on higher ed, starting more
Right.
than a decade ago to make this happen, right? So this is not an accident. The fact that when we now say the word completion, we also talk about the real costs of college, meaning what we call non-tuition expenses. What I wish that we actually started to say is that the biggest cost of college for most students in the United States is housing.
Hmm.
It's the leading cause of student debt. It's the number one basic needs insecurity, and it's going to continue to be.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the discourse has shifted and people now use terms like basic needs, again, is the result of a concerted campaign put together by a coalition working in many parts of the country, and by the way, with different strategies. So I led a fraction of it. Ruben Canedo out in California has led a lot of it. There's been a really powerful group of people in CUNY that have been leading it. And part of that campaign was also to get this talk in the discourse. So this is why you found media stories. This is why you saw New York Times op-eds. This is why we did, popular television shows and tried to get this out there. It's why Soledad O'Brien made a documentary called Hungry to Learn. This is all the strategy. Okay. And there have been good things that have happened. So the things that I feel most proud of are that we moved beyond diagnostic of sort of individual problems of individual institutions and really started to see how the structures could change. So we're seeing policy change, right? I count every bill that's introduced at the federal level to address these challenges, every action taken by the Department of Education as a win. This past week, we saw another one. In the middle of the FAFSA mess, the Department of Ed still took the time to send a memo to state agencies around the country, state agencies, financial aid, telling them you can share FAFSA data with organizations to help increase students' use of particular public assistance programs. That was huge. It can do so much good. Washington State is a leader in their state agency now doing that work. They're actually telling students coming out of high school who have been, for example, on free lunch or in the SNAP program, you're going to get automatic assistance for college.
Right.
That simplifies the message. That's a win. We're seeing states, including yours, including Illinois, right? Passing bills, for example, putting what we call single points of contact on campuses for homeless students, right? Some are doing benefits navigators, right? That's important. Some are doing things around food insecurity. There's just been a whole range. The more widespread data collection is another way. It's so important. And the fact that by my count, my team alone fielded surveys at over 700 colleges and universities, and I'm sure there's another 700 that did it without us. When we're collecting data, it gives us a guidepost, it gives us something we can do, right? And then the other thing is that, yes, the science is advancing, so we no longer have to simply guess. Should I do this or should I do that? Like, I can tell you right now that if you have a donor that wants to give you $25,000, your best bet is to put that money towards one of two things. One, either somebody's time to help students with public benefits, or two, for your emergency aid program to give students money flexibly with dignity. I would not put it in a food pantry. I would not put it in a food pantry. And the reason is simple. The food pantry is a signaling device. It does not ever reduce hunger. It really doesn't. That's not what the science shows. It's a signaling device to help your students know that you care, but students should only really visit once. Once they visited, they showed you that they have need. Now you have to connect them to things that address the problem.
Right.
And so we don't need incredibly stocked food pantries that look like grocery stores. There are grocery stores. What we need to do is get students money so they can go to the grocery store, which is actually, I have to tell you, what students would greatly prefer. It gives them a lot more dignity and a lot more choice. And most students do not live on campus. Remember that only 15% of American college students live on campus. So let's focus on treating them with the dignity and respect that they deserve, which is wherever they live, they want to be able to go and shop. And that's also important for the people with children.
That's a really good point, Sarah. We do tend to, especially in higher ed, lump these services all into one place, right? So in the state of Illinois, yes, you've mentioned that we have some new policies that have come out, and certainly we're very proud of that. How are we doing those, and where are we putting the people? That could look very, very different, as you're saying. Most likely, we are putting all those things into one shot. But as you're saying, it is, we do know it's, food pantries, while great, are a Band-Aid. Like we have to get into some of those bigger solutions. And thank you for sharing that, that are and everybody loves, especially when you could be specific and say there are 2 things you can invest your money in, because we do have presidents on this call as well. So, being able to say, hey, what are those 2 things that'll make the biggest impact is being able to provide those people resources, to be able to provide that time, to be able to fill out those forms for benefits, because we still do have a lot of students that are not filling those out and don't have the resources or know-how. And then also on emergency aid. One of our mutual colleagues and friends really talks a lot about how we hire at the crap out of everything. How we're a very educated group, but sometimes, we're wonderful for having some of the biggest committees, the most time spent. And sometimes we miss some things because we're higher editing it. What would you say are some of those things we're just higher editing on this topic? Like, we got so many things that are going out, but like, is there places where we're missing this up?
Yeah, there's a lot, unfortunately.
Okay.
I want to quickly acknowledge that in the chat, there's a conversation about the staff and the faculty, and I want to triple underline, of course, you're exactly right. You're exactly right, folks. Of course, these things are affecting the faculty and staff. I had the opportunity to do a little bit of survey work on that, mostly in partnership with Compton College, which has a very brave president in Keith Curry.
Yeah.
And he was faced with the fact that both students and staff and faculty on his campus all deal with these issues. And frankly, he created an emergency fund, as well as taking other steps to increase their pay within the guidelines, in the union negotiations and so on. But he's been working on that. I'll give you one example of a practice that he has that I love. Instead of a food pantry, which they have, but it's really not a focus, they created a partnership with a local business called Every Table. Every Table makes healthy, ready-to-eat meals. Okay, the kind that, you go into Whole Foods or whatever, and there's, like something that looks really good and is nutritious and is takeaway. They have refrigerators. You go in and it says, if you are somebody who works here or somebody who goes to school here, we don't care who you are, you can have 1 free meal a day. Just walk in and take it. And this is a business win, and this is a win for the college, the custodial staff, everybody. In addition, they have a farmer's market on campus, and he uses his emergency aid funds to provide everybody who goes to the market with a $20 voucher so that they can go through and shop. And once they've used their 20, they can use other resources they have to buy more things, but that at least gives them an entry point to the market itself, which is brilliant. Okay. Also, by the way, there are people there who shop who are definitely faculty, and there are things that are available that are hot and ready to eat, not just things that are groceries. So for students that don't have kitchens, maybe living in their car, that's also helpful. Okay, so you asked me, oh gosh, now I'm going backwards. Give me a quick reminder.
It's okay. It's okay. You're addressing, and I apologize for that. I wasn't
okay.
I was just focusing on you. So we were talking a little bit about things that we may be higher editing.
Higher editing.
So
yes.
what are we complicating?
We're complicating a couple things.
Okay.
First thing, when we higher ed things, we act like we're the experts on everything.
Yep.
We know how. The most important stance that higher education institutions can take towards basic needs work is a learning stance. You need to get into listening and learning mode. You need to go out and meet your potential partners in your community. You are never going to do this by yourselves, ever. And what you do is you go and you bring your evidence of the need so that they can get educated to that, right? They might need to know how many of your students are affected. What are you seeing? And then you listen. How do they do their work? How might they be able to help you? How might you be able to help them?
Right.
Don't tell them how to help with food. Ask them how they do it. Don't tell them how to help with housing. Identify their needs. So for example, go to your local public housing authority. Ask them about their current educational programming. See if there's a way to do what Chicago Housing Authority is doing, creating a program to help their residents. What does Chicago Housing Authority want? It wants people to become economically stable enough to leave the housing.
Right.
So helping them have college access and providing that support to the people in public housing is a win for them. They could also help you place people into public housing who are your own students possibly, or adjust the rules so that full-time college students can live there. Similarly, if you start a conversation with, let's say, your local apartment building, and I urge you, by the way, to not just think about the apartment buildings right next to your campuses. Students are better off in an affordable apartment that is 30 minutes away than one that is unaffordable that is 5 minutes away.
Right.
So go talk to these people, find out their vacancy rate. Okay, they don't like vacancy. Vacancy is bad for business, especially if they've pre-purchased the utilities or paying as a whole. Tell them that you can help them fill those spaces, but you need a deal. You need a couple of those rooms maybe dedicated for emergency housing. You might need some of those to be discounted. They will benefit and you can make private partnerships. Go to your local mechanic. Find one who's an alumni. See if you can't negotiate a way for your students to get their cars fixed for less money. Russell Lowry Hart did it at Amarillo College, and he went far enough to call that mechanic his college success coach. Second, stop with the bureaucracy.
Right.
Basic needs programs should not have a FAFSA in front of them and should definitely not have the FAFSA to get help. If you are making students wait for basic needs support or spending more staff time figuring out who gets what than actually helping them, then you're just exacerbating the problem. Okay? People in emergency situations, in dire situations that are worried about their basic needs are being traumatized, literally, by being told that their emergency aid application will take 2 weeks to be processed or has to be voted on by a committee that's trying to figure out if they're performing their poverty well enough.
Right.
Yes,
It's an
you have
emergency.
too many students. Yes, you have too many students with need. Yes, you are short-staffed. The result should be streamlining everything. Use technology whenever possible, okay? There's new tech that's coming out that Education Northwest is going to start to share more about because you can use tech to do your intake. You can have waiting lists that are technologically enabled. You can have short applications. And if you can't serve everyone, then say so. Tell students you're doing your best. Take that waiting list and go use it to fundraise. But don't close the list. If I'm going to give you money, and I do give away money, that's why there's Believe in Students, which is a nonprofit that I've helped fund. If I say, how many students do you need to help? And you say, well, we ran out, so we stopped taking the application. I'm not convinced then. What you need to tell me is I have 102 students on the waiting list and their typical need is for $300. Cool. Now I know what we're talking about.
Right.
Students would also appreciate the transparency. We do too much just closing doors and not being upfront and honest. Remember, your students are adults. And I say that I understand there's dual enrollment. I have dual enrollment students. Okay, I'm not talking about them. If they're 18, they're adults. They get to vote, they can go to war. They can handle you telling them upfront the truth. And I think that's a big deal. And I don't think higher ed is really well known, unfortunately, for treating them that way and leveling with them. And that's what they need in these situations. They really need to be able to trust you.
Yeah, I have definitely seen situations, Sarah, I think, and thank you for sharing all that where, we're trying to hoard money so it'll go longer versus what you're saying is if you run out of funds, use the fact that you have more students that need it to go and raise some more money. Because certainly we saw that during Even during the pandemic, when we needed more emergency aid, more people started to give because some institutions weren't there yet. So how do
That's
we
right. Right.
right?
But
How do we
Claudia, remember,
catalyze?
we
Yeah,
had institutions that were so afraid they would run out of money that they didn't spend their pandemic money. And
right.
they held on and they held on. And I have to be honest with you that they were part of the reason the Department of Ed couldn't make the case to Congress to do more funding.
Mm,
We have to take what we are given and spend it.
right.
It is absolutely best practice. You can do strategic things. To be clear, this practice is called rationing. That is what's happening. It's
Mm-hmm,
rationing. It's a rational response. You're human beings too. Staff, you're
mm-hmm,
human beings. Administrators, you are human beings. Rationing is what we do. Students, when I gave out meal vouchers at a college and we were testing whether meal vouchers would help, some of them were so afraid they'd have a day that was even worse than today that they would hold on to those vouchers for later. They'd go hungry in case it would be worse later. That's
right.
not, we would tell them, no, please eat now, or you won't make it till later, right?
Mm-hmm,
So you can take an allocation, for example. If I have $100,000, I'm going to divide it perhaps. Beginning of the semester, end of the semester, start of next term. Spend, spend, and spend. You can set up an application period and wait till the end of that period, maybe over 1 week. That way you don't just do first come, first serve, which is frankly still a little inequitable. But we're also so afraid, by the way, to flip a coin. Come on, we give away seats to things all the time using lotteries. Lottery,
mm-hmm.
I will tell you, students understand a lottery is way fairer than a staff member making a judgment based on little information to try to figure out what they think is equitable, which oftentimes is the opposite of equitable, especially when, let's look at financial aid offices, which for years looked at a student with need and said, but your nails are done.
Right.
Right? Come on, this stuff is baked in. You don't want to sit there with your colleagues and debate whether the mom who needs childcare is more or less worthy of your support than the guy who's homeless and living in his car. The truth is they both need money. And the best thing you can do is give one of them money as fast as you possibly can.
You're right. I mean, I experienced that when I was working during the pandemic. We're trying to get technology out to students, and then I hear, well, they look fine. They don't look like they're in need. And it's like, well,
do you know how hard they work? How
right.
hard they work to look like they don't have need? You've got homeless students who go to the library and take up the magazine and rip out the perfume samples.
Yeah.
Okay, so to cover up the smell. And then we have librarians that tell them they can't take out the magazines anymore. A lot of librarians are wonderful. We have people who come in who go to students who are sleeping and wake them up because they don't look like they're homeless and they're probably just wasting people's time. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's not human. That's not human-centered design. You're driving people away from your institution. And the problem is that when the culture of care is not there, and even 5 people go do that nonsense, somebody interacts with them, and that's the story that gets told. That's the story that ends up on the Reddit for your institution. And I troll the Reddits and read them all.
Well,
and they're not good for business.
Should. Right. I mean, and it is a business, but we have to get better at supporting humankind and understanding that we are still many times judging our students by the cover, right? And thinking, well, they look fine, they're here, or they're not interested, or they're constantly late, or this or that, right? When we're talking, obviously, transportation challenges, and we're talking about childcare challenges, or the fact that maybe they worked multiple jobs and they just got out of that workplace and they're just barely arriving and they're barely making it. There's so much judgment, and you're right. Like, how can we remove this level of biasness that's within us of who needs it? Some institutions, we're still not at that place yet where we can say, well, we support these basic needs and we should have a role in playing in this. But yet we do know that it's the right thing to do if we're trying to help improve students' lives, that we need to obviously have a role in this. And I always appreciate your transparency, Sarah. Go out into the community, ask them, listen, right? As you're saying, let's say we don't know everything, and we've become kind of prescriptive of what we think needs to happen in some of these spaces, and just saying, okay, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, but then we don't really actually know if that's what our students need. And I think you're right. Asking the questions to our community and asking them certainly to our students is the first step. So if you haven't done that yet, we
I
definitely need
encourage you
to.
to do it. You didn't get your doctorate probably in this area of work, right?
No,
Unless you did a doctorate in social work or a related field, you didn't do your doctorate in this. You don't know what you don't know. And let me just give you a quick story, because I've been
yeah,
chewing on this. I'm working on my next book extremely slowly because it's really hard. And I just want to admit, I do not, this is the hardest thing I've ever done, is trying to write about all this human-centered stuff in a way
mm,
that would make you feel like you were reading a novel. That's what I'm
mm,
trying.
okay,
But there's this moment that stands out to me last fall when I was teaching sociology at the Community College of Philadelphia. I'd studied community colleges for decades, but I had never taught in one. One thing I knew was that when we talk about retention, we typically talk about term to term. But when we talk about community college retention, it's entirely possible that the students there on the first week won't be there on the last.
right,
So I was not surprised when my department chair told me that my number one job was not to teach sociology, it was to retain my students.
mm,
And I appreciate that, because they
yes,
can't learn sociology if they're not there.
right,
Okay, I had 36 students at the start of the term, and my measure of success for myself was how many would be there at the end of the term. I kept 33 of them. Okay, and I was told that if I got out above 15, I was doing well.
mm,
Now, here's the thing. One of the ways that students feel alienated is when they start showing up late for various reasons, like you said, like transportation or childcare. And then they get kind of smacked down for it, right? I decided, especially after the first few weeks, where almost no one was on time, that I might need to rethink what being on time meant. I started to understand that the students who were there on time were my students with the least going on in their lives. They were younger, they were single, they had some
true,
parental support. And I started to realize that the fact that at the beginning of my class, I had 12 students, like what minute one, that at the end of 2 hours, I had typically 30, and that some would show up with 15 minutes left in my class, was a sign of commitment and also a sign that they liked the class. They
mm,
would text message me telling me they were coming and come running in the door to say, what did I miss?
mm-hmm,
Once I began to understand that, then I started trying to work in other ways with the ones who were late to make sure they could still get the good stuff from class and still get the learning. Yes, it took more work. Yes, I am not a typical adjunct. Okay, I do this on the side, it pays horribly. I feel awful for all adjuncts. This is not a sustainable situation. But I will tell you as a technique that the mindset shift absolutely works. They feel seen, they feel valued, and they do retain.
I think being in the classroom is one of the biggest and most important things we can do if we're able to, right? So I'm an adjunct at 2 different institutions, and well, if I count, so I once taught at Malcolm X College here in the city colleges of Chicago, and I was the one person who would take the Sunday class. And I taught the Sunday class, and it was the same thing. My students were rushing from jobs because it wasn't a weekend. But I couldn't take them anywhere because everything was closed at that time. And this was years ago, but there was no services open, right? It was a miracle, but I was very, fortunate that I got the advisor to be able to come out on the Sunday and be able to talk to them. I would have students that would sit up front, and I was wondering why they seemed to kind of be in focus and be not in focus. Well, he couldn't afford glasses, right? So he was sitting at the very front trying to see, and then the student who couldn't make it, who was supposed to be dressed up professionally one day, who eventually just sent the picture because they couldn't make it, and they apologized, but those things would just come up. And I think when you're in that space and you get to know your students, just like you have, you can really start to see, wow, there's a lot of challenges that are going on, but being in those rooms or having that conversation that started you with this 15 years ago, that's what really, really helps us to start making some of those changes. So what do you think we're doing or could be doing better in terms of, so we're, our organization, and we do a lot of work on advocacy and trying to implement changes at the state level. And we certainly try to partner with our institutions of higher ed to be able to tell us, what's working, what's not working, what can we do better, and how can we support the work. What do you see that is some of the stuff that, even just a couple of ideas of what we can do better at state levels to be able to support students.
Yeah. Well, look, we have to take the idea that really has become my mantra, which is that students are humans first.
Mm.
And we have to turn that into policy, right? We have to make sure that we go beyond the usual approaches, right? So, I would like to see us be a little bit more strategic. It's great that, so first we had to increase people's willingness to talk about these things, right? And the number of coalitions working around it and the voices and right, if you want policy change, you got to build all of that. But also want to make sure that, again, we focus on state policy changes that will matter the most, right? So you've done some things in Illinois, for example, around SNAP. And I think that's important. SNAP is a bit easier for college students to get in Illinois compared to some other states.
Okay.
I also know you have a giant SNAP gap still. What do I mean? People who could get SNAP, who are eligible for it, are still not getting it. There's almost nothing more important. There really is. And this is such a big deal. And I'd like to see at the state level, right, efforts like, for example, when the students apply for the state financial aid program, that the information in there is used immediately to send people information about their SNAP eligibility. I would like to see a requirement that every semester institutions do a quick assessment of food insecurity after registration. Like, don't tie it to registration. People will think you're going to discriminate against them, right? But maybe in the learning management system, a quick welcome back, we're checking in.
Right.
And then go after them too. Make sure, because ones who don't apply for financial aid and ones who don't show up for Pell are still food insecure, by the way. Like, absolutely. Right. There's plenty of food insecurity among people who are above the Pell line and people who don't FAFSA. So that's why this is important, right? I want to see those kinds of strategies put in. I think that if your technology systems on your campus don't facilitate your basic needs work, then you're at a huge disadvantage. I have worked with countless of these providers, Starfish, others. I don't think most of them really allow for good case management work and for integration of data inside and outside your institution. So for example, you may have reporting that's required back to an agency, or you need to take in data. If you're doing housing work, you have data to take in. We have to put some money into those systems. I'd like to see some state funding for that kind of thing. That makes case management possible to do well, right? It also, by the way, helps secure it. If you're doing housing work with homeless college students, you may very well have data that is, if you think FERPA protects things, you should see the kind of protections around those data. I'm worried we're just not taking that part seriously either. Doesn't mean don't do it, it means pay attention to. So that's what I mean about, like, not all these ideas are created equal. I'm going to say something very controversial because I'm known for that. And I think it'll be helpful.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I don't love the idea of labeling institutions hunger-free. I understand it's a very higher ed thing to do. We like to compete to be the best of whatever, to be ranked, to be called these things. I really worry for students who attend a campus that's supposedly hunger-free and they're hungry. I did not create a program called the Real College program where we slapped that label on all the conferences, people who came to our conferences or did our programs. I did not do that. Even the ones who did the survey, we didn't do that, because this isn't about labels. This is about institutional change. And I do want to applaud and lift up people doing this work. But I don't want this to become a matter of checking boxes. And I worry. And I worry that it's too cheap. We're giving it away for too cheap right now. Now, I know there are folks who disagree with me, and there are people in this field who advance those ideas, and we can reasonably disagree with one another. But, this is partly where I'm a sociologist. I didn't come out of higher ed. And I think a lot about the politics and the interactions of these tools. And it's a similar thing to my concern about simple arguments around doubling Pell and about putting whole energy around doubling Pell, because I'm going to be honest with you, there's next to no chance that will ever happen, because the nature of the program is a program that is focused on people that people think are undeserving poor. And in our country, we don't fund those programs. So somebody asked in here, what else can we do? Universal design. We need to build universally accessible public institutions that don't charge tuition, that offer a free lunch, that do the things that our high schools do, that we did when we made high school compulsory. I'm not calling to make college compulsory. I am calling to use the tools and tactics that we use to eliminate costs. OER is great. That's universal design. Also, by the way, OER costs a lot more and is harder on faculty than we're willing to admit, but we have to do the work, right? So that's the answer. EFC, somebody said, what do you do with that? Oh, EFC is a nightmare. It's now called SAI. It's modestly better. Not really. EFC is ridiculous. COA is ridiculous. All these numbers are lies. I wrote a piece called The Real Price of College. If you Google that, you'll find it. I'm actually, you guys are going to circulate my resource library, and Real Price of College is in there. Don't gaslight students and tell them that their EFC reflects their actual ability to pay. It's not true.
Right. We just, there was just a report that came out on unveiling disparities and from Jobs for the Future. And it really talks about how when students are already in debt, how now they're feeling even the sense that they're not going to be able to repay back any of those loans, and how much worse it gets after, right? And we certainly need to move beyond just getting the students to even finish, which is a huge struggle, but also then, you know, what is the cost afterwards? What is the debt that they may have afterwards, and what is the actual job that they're going to have, and all those other pieces. So there's so much here, and I know we're getting close to time. So I know you have a lot of projects at play, and yes, we have a slide that we'll share in just a moment on some other important resources for the team. But what would you say is anything else that we should know, or, you know, you got a captive group here that you would want them to be able to take back, or even know some of the things that are coming down the pipeline for you, or some other great areas that people should just be aware of?
Yeah, well, I have a lot going on.
You do.
It's amazing how much one can accomplish when they're freed of university bureaucracy.
You're right.
I'm just going to say it. It's true.
It's true.
All right. Anyway, so several things. So first of all, I've brought over a bunch of my basic needs work to Education Northwest, which is based in Oregon, but works nationally. So stay tuned there, because we have rolled out a community of practice that's totally free and open to anyone. Hopefully some of you are in it. It includes a LinkedIn group. If you Google or if you search up college basic needs in LinkedIn, you'll find our LinkedIn group, and you can send a request to join us. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And we're holding a webinar really soon that should be of interest to many of you. It's called, it's about a program for homeless and housing insecure college students that was considered the National Vanguard program. It's in Tacoma, Washington. It has sunsetted now, which is a topic of discussion. I spent 9 years leading a research team studying its effects on students. And I'm releasing the results on April 30th. So that's something.
Okay.
And then just a couple of other things for folks to keep an eye out for. So I'm really thrilled that there is now a national initiative that's supported by many philanthropists, including ECMC, called Kids on Campus. And it's about an efficient way to bring childcare to campus by bringing your Head Start onto your community college campus. And ACCT is running it, the community college trustees, and colleges can sign up, and you can get free technical assistance to help you to do that work. I'm also working with a team that is working to help colleges utilize Medicaid dollars to provide health services and basic needs services on their campus. So I think we're going to share a link for the Medicaid for College project, also supported by ECMC and Kresge. And I love this because here's the thing. You're probably eligible for money for the work you're already doing. You're just not filing for reimbursement. And we're going to help you figure that out. And I think that that's incredibly promising, because who doesn't want more money?
Right.
And then the national nonprofit that I'm working with, Believe in Students, which is doing a lot of work in the Great Lakes region. One of the things that they're doing that I'm thrilled about is they're helping carry forward an idea that I started working on years ago, which is the real college curriculum, which recognizes that faculty and staff and administrators are honestly very highly educated, but often did not get basic needs training. and gives you training in a very sexy masterclass kind of way. So high gloss, Soledad O'Brien style stuff with teaching that meets adults' needs, that's all segmented and chopped up into easy to get pieces, featuring people like Keith Curry, featuring people like Ruben Canedo and others, so that you're going to be able to have this that you could do individually or at your college. And we're starting to roll it out in California now, hopefully in Maryland soon, and hopefully by next year in multiple other places. So that gives you a sense of the range of kinds of things going on. I'm on social media. I update all the time if anybody wants to connect on there.
We follow you religiously around here, Sara. You know that 4 times a day sometimes. You're very, very busy. We're going to get access right now to be able to pull up that resource page that we have that gives everyone access. I think Mercedes working on that right now. But I did promise you, and I always appreciate your honesty and your frankness. That's why we're here, because we need that. We need that in the field to actually be able to make the institutional changes that we have. So I know it's been a heavy topic and it's an important topic, but I think I promised you at one point that I'd give you a random question. So I didn't forget. I never forget about random questions. I have a lot, but based off of time and my team's now starting to freak out, I'll limit it to one, and it's not going to be so random. We already took care of the hot dog one this morning, and whether it's a sandwich or not, Sara, just so you know. And I don't think you want to step into that one. You have enough controversial stuff, but the answer, I believe, especially for Illinois people, is that it is a hot dog is not a sandwich. It's a hot dog. I know, mind blowing, right? I know. So, Sara, I am a huge book nerd, as a lot of my team knows, and other people who know me. What is that one thing that you're reading that
I'm so glad you asked me that question.
I'm so glad you're going to answer it.
I love this book that I'm reading, and I just got an update from Libby, my library thing, telling me it's being returned, and I'm like, no, I'm not done. So I am reading this book called Diary of a Misfit.
Ooh, okay.
by Casey Parks, Casey Parks. Casey is now a reporter at the Washington Post, but Casey got her start in Mississippi and Louisiana and then in Oregon. And this is a story about what it really means to be there for human beings. Mm. And it is also a story about not feeling like you fit in. And about the many ways that plays out in your life. And I'm obsessed with it, both because of the theme around humans, but also because Casey writes like an absolute dream. And all I want to do is write like Casey. And I was honored. I wrote Casey on Twitter. I direct messaged Casey a couple days ago and said, I just want to be you and write like you. And Casey wrote back and said that she'd actually read Paying the Price. And so we're in a mutual admiration society now. And now I think that I can never get off Twitter because that's the coolest thing ever. But I don't know how to write like Casey. And so now I'm like literally underlining Casey's sentences and figuring out how I can like mimic them. I would like to just follow Casey around while she writes. Well, and see, that's be in her head.
Right. I mean, I don't blame you. That's how many people feel about your work, Sara. So, I'm not even trying to flatter you. Like, we really it's the book, it's the research, it's the straight talk. It's seeing what you have going on out there. So we will definitely check this out because we're always looking for good book options. But also just all the resources that you're able to share, the things that we can do better, the things that are working. That's why we're here today, and being able to share those things out. So thank you so much. People are already putting in here, there's e-copies available. Good. Go to support your local library, everybody. Sometimes we have to read faster, right? Like we got to try to get it in, because I know I've had to return some stuff and then I just got to go and buy it afterwards because I can't finish it yet and I want to keep it. That's the English lit major in me. But Sara, thank you so much for all your time and for joining us today. Really appreciated all the words of wisdom, all the things that we can do. We have so much work ahead of us, but it's great knowing that we have a champion with you and so many other people. So just wanted to say thank you and express our gratitude towards you and to everybody who's joined us today.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here and for engaging in this work. And I'm so grateful to the whole team for hosting today and for inviting me. So
Well,
have
we
a good night.
appreciate you.
Enjoy
Yep.
your weekend. Get some
Thank
rest.
you. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see everybody back soon at 1:10.